Learning Perik Tes, Halacha Ches, and the Rambam, Hilchos Melochim. Rambam begins. Benoach sheyiched shivcha la'avdoi. Benoach who set aside a slave of his a female slave for his male slave, and he had a relationship with a female slave. Rae Gann. It's considered a wife of his friend. Why? It is his friend's wife. Sorry. And he's not liable until it spreads out, becomes known that these two have been set aside as husband and wife. And people speak to her, Zulu the base Eved Pliny. She is the wife of such and such a slave. When is she considered no longer his wife? When he shall separate, he seems to have the right to separate her. And she will uncover her head in the marketplace. Kesef Mishnah cites Sanhedrin 58b. Ben Noach, that was set aside a maidservant for his slave, and he had a relationship with her, he's liable for death penalty just like any other wife. And when Rav Nachman say that this is considered his wife, when they call her the wife of the slave. Rashi there explains when is she set aside. The Mishnah emphasizes the answer to the Gemara. Rashi says Reviso, not the house or the resh. That means when all the daughters of the city calls her the Revisa is the language of a child of so and so. Afterwards, the master had a relationship with her. He is liable for the death penalty like any other married non-Jewish couple. The Mishnah cites that the text before us in the Gemara is with the Daled, that she's found in someone's house. More questions. When is she permitted? Rashi there explains when does she go back to her possibility to live with anyone she wants. She's not a wife of someone. The more answers when she uncovers her head in the marketplace. Rashi explains that even the non-Jewish women would cover their head, and the wife of Israel is obligated to cover their head. Therefore, the Rambam writes, when he separates her from the slave and takes off, and she uncovers her head in the marketplace, that the master who set it aside with the wife, he is the one who makes divorce take effect, and she's separated from the slave, and she uncovers her here in public. The Aruch LaNer and Hilchos Chinuch point out the Gemara would seem even if she herself uncovered her hair, that would be enough. As Rashi says, that uncovering her head and going out takes from her this concept that she was set aside for the slave. The Machon Nesher explains that Rambam is of the opinion, just like the master caused it to be forbidden when he mated her with that slave, so too he can remove her from that forbiddenness when he takes off her covering. But the slave cannot free herself, or he cannot free himself, even though non-Jews can divorce one from the other. Peirush HaMeir writes from Rashi that Ben Noach set aside his maidservant for a slave, and he had a relationship with her. He is killed because he's stealing, not because it's a wife. And he explains that a goy does not have an acquisition of the physical body of the slave, and therefore the Eved, when he lives with his maidservant, she becomes his, and she's not in the domain of the master to free her whenever he wants. And therefore the Gemara says that if afterwards the master lived with her, he is killed because she is a married woman. The Rambam is of the opinion that the master cannot cause her to be removed from her husband. He disagrees with the Rambam, who says that the master can separate the two of them from being a couple. The later commentaries discuss, in Halacha Zayin he wrote, Ben Noach is not liable on his friend's wife until he lives with her in a normal way after she lived with her husband. But if she is betrothed or she went into the chuppah, even by a Jewish woman, and did not have a relationship, you're not liable on her, because there it says she is a woman that has had a relationship with her husband. Because by Ben Noach, there's no concept of betrothal or going into the chuppah except having a relationship. And here the Rambam writes, he is killed because of the wife of his friend. Does the Rambam mean to say immediately after the master sets her aside, or only if the slave had a relationship with her? The Ridvaz refers to Sanhedrin 57a that the transgression of the non-Jew is not because of immorality, but because of theft, and not because of filial obligations. In the Brisa it says on Gezel because of theft. And Rashi explains that they steal the wife of their friend's wife, another goy's wife, in war. The Brisa says, whereas a Vastoya, there it is permitted by a Jew because the Torah said so. The Gemara clarifies that when Noach was killed on living with a maidservant that he set aside for his slave, the Rashi clarifies because of theft. The forbiddenness is not because she's his wife, because a slave, even with a maidservant, is only promiscuity, just like acting in a animalistic fashion. And in questions, it would seem you're liable because of theft, and not like the Rambam here who says that it's because the maidservant is considered the wife of the slave, the wife of his fellow man. Ridvaz Nagos Chamor Dechaya explained that the Rambam is the opinion there's no din gezel, that even if the slave purchased a woman, still whatever the slave purchases belongs to his master, and you can't obligate a master because of theft if it belongs to him. The Ridvaz adds, by a woman who's taken in battle, there's no theft, because anything that's taken in battle has no din of theft. He explains here the Rambam didn't have to explain that if she's didn't have a relationship, then she's not considered his wife, because the only way a wife is considered a wife by a non-Jew is through relationship. Therefore, a non-Jew who set aside a maidservant for a slave must be talking about that they ever lived with her. That's why the Rambam doesn't mention it. And since she's considered having lived with she has lived with the slave, therefore the master is killed because he consorted with his friend's wife. And so we see from the Gemara, from when is she permitted? When she opens up her hair, uncovers her head in the marketplace. It must be because the permitted, she's no longer married, because if it would be because of theft and the slave purchased her, what does it help that she uncovers her head? She was purchased by the slave. Thus, we see according to the Ridvaz, the Rambam learns that the Odin does not transgress on theft. He's liable because it's his friend's wife. Thus, according to the Ridvaz, the Rambam would learn that the Odin is not transgressing on theft. He's liable on the shiur that he set aside because of the wife. It means after the Eved lived with her. The Chesed David. Spusum Sanhedrin 58b, that the liability of the master who set aside a maidservant for a slave is because of marriage, and this he had a relationship with her and a stranger that would live with her is liable because of theft. The master is because of marriage, and the stranger because of theft. And he adds the master is liable because of marriage, even if the maidservant and the slave agreed that he can have a relationship with her. Melochim is of the opinion that according to Rashi, there is no marriage to an Eved Knani. Therefore he writes that you're liable because of Gezel. And according to this, he'll be liable only if when they do not agree. But otherwise, there is no theft. The Hilchos Chinuch Mitzvah 35 says that his words in Halacha Zayin, a Ben Noach is not liable on his friend's wife until he has a relationship with her in the normal fashion, seem to contradict what he wrote in Halacha Yudalad, that a Ben Noach who has a relationship with his friend's wife, he transgresses on theft. It says, he explains that there it's talking about where they had an unnatural relationship against her will, and not with the agreement of the husband, he will be liable for theft. And if they agreed with him, he's liable because of transgressing the law of not living with your friend's wife. Regarding a master that is Yisrael, there is no concept of marriage by his maidservant that he set aside for his slave. As we find in Sirei Bia, there's no marriage only for Yisrael or between Goy to Goya. But even a shivcha that's set aside for a slave is just like the same as the one who's not set aside, and there's no marriage to a slave or a maidservant with a Jew. The Lushiran says that to transgress on theft, you have to set her aside, that because with the relationship without setting her aside, she doesn't become a wife, because the thought of the participants is not for marriage. Because the slaves live together promiscuously. Only after they have set aside together in their own domain, so to speak, then we can discuss whether or not they're liable after the slave has lived with her, as we find in Ridvaz. The Toras Chaim says the liability is when he's liable even before the slave lived with her, because if you live with her, she's forbidden because of marriage. You don't have to say, and it's self-evident that it is theft. Me'emes Haitiyah. Rambam says, when is she permitted? Eishes Chaveroi, the wife of a Ben Noach that was forbidden to him, B'kigrusha Shalanu, that she should be similar to the divorcee of ours, where we have to write a get creases. Mishiyotzienu miBeisoin, he sends her out, Mishdachenu la'atzmo, and he sends her off on her own, or the reverse, Mishiteitzehi mitachas Shusoin, or if she leaves him, V'teilach lo, and go away. She'ein lahem gerushim b'ksav. There's no concept of a divorce contract. Ve'ein adovatoli boy levad. It doesn't depend only on him, because the Torah didn't give him that right. So who or he, anytime that they decide they're no longer partners, person they can separate, and she is considered an unmarried woman and can have whatever relationship she wants. The Mishnah Lamelach cites the Yerushalmi, and also Peirush Rebbe, the Yefei Toya, the Yerushalmi. He brings some Malachim that the words are Kishono Sholach Omar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, and that he hated her and he sent her away. So says Hashem Elokei Yisrael, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not put his name on divorce only by Jews. Therefore, only by Jews is a concept of divorce with a a divorce contract. The Peirush HaMeir cites in the Rambam that the gerushin by a ben noach goes after the din of ben noach who set aside a maidservant for a slave. The Bible doesn't say that there's no how. It doesn't say how the wife of a ben noach goes back to being an unmarried woman. Only the ben noach who set aside a maidservant for a slave, it says that the master can separate them. And since only in the Yerushalmi it says that the wife of ben noach is permitted after she leaves, therefore, after he brings to the Babli, the din of ben noach who set aside a maidservant for a slave, how she's permitted, he brings to the Yerushalmi that every woman of ben noach, when are they permitted? If they sent away, or she left him. The Peirush HaMeir adds, when he set aside his maidservant for a slave, she's the wife of his friend, without relationship even. Not the same as every other marriage which has to do by a goy with the relationship, because the relationship of a slave with a maidservant is not for the concept of marriage, and therefore it has to be separated. They have to be closeted together, and that's enough. And therefore, when he separates them, it's not enough. He separates them from his slave. He has to do an action. She has to take off her head covering in the marketplace to show that the master has separated them, and therefore she's permitted only from when her head is uncovered. He cites that Rabbeinu David is the opinion that there's no possibility of divorce by ben noach. Through the Yerushalmi that we mentioned, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not give his name upon divorce, only by Yisrael. And the simple interpretation of the Yerushalmi is a disagreement of Tanoim if divorce is valid by a goy when they both divorce each other, or there's no possibility of divorce. Amir Dov is the opinion that even though they have no divorce by the maidservant, there is a specific clause that she becomes to be freed from her husband, from the slave, because she only became his husband, the wife, when he lived with her, not because we lived with her, but because the master said put them aside as being together. And therefore, it can be removed by taking off her head cover in the marketplace. But every other ben noach that is acquired through relationship, there's no need to be divorced. Ran disagrees with Rabbeinu David. So the Rabbeinu David says you cannot be divorced. Ran pushes off the opinion of Rabbeinu David that we can learn that the intent of the Yerushalmi is that he doesn't have to go through a divorce with a contract. And ben noach, it's enough to send her without a divorce, or vice versa. If she separates from him, it would also be a divorce. In Hagoyes ben Aryeh, they bring different texts between in the Peirush Rebbe and the Yerushalmi. And according to the Rambam, you can say that his text was the Yerushalmi, the Medrash. They do not have divorce, but they can divorce each other, and it means they don't have an obligation of a divorce contract, but they can separate. The separation is a divorce. Or it could mean that they don't have any way of divorce, like the Rabbeinu David understood it. The Ben Aryeh is the opinion that according to the Rambam, a goy can divorce. They don't need a divorce contract. Its proof is by the Eved that the Odin puts them together. It says that at taking off the cover, she becomes freed even without the permission of the Eved. I mean, that was the opinion only by a maidservant that the master set her aside to be a wife. This small act of taking off her head covering permits her to be freed, but all other wives of a non-Jew, when they are married through relationship, there is no divorce. Note that this is the disagreement between the Catholic Church and the Islam faith. According to the Catholic Church, there's no divorce. According to the Islam faith, you don't have to do anything.